So this one gets me really emotional. You feel abandoned when you're being, you feel like you're alone. My name is JoJo Dries, and today we're going to talk about my story, how I came out of being a victim of domestic violence. The first time I can remember being was at age 9. So I am one of 6 children. This type of happened to all of us. So the physical, the emotional, the control was on each child. The first time I remember being was at age 9. I had been yelled at and thrown into my room and told I could not get out until I agreed with what it was that I was being corrected on. An abuser wants to brainwash you into thinking if you have any other opinion than theirs, you are wrong. I had to stay in my room to agree with my abuser. I hear this person creeping down the hall, and all of a sudden my door opens and it's my dad. His beady eyes are just staring at me with anger, right? This anger that he had earlier had not gone away. He came in my bedroom, took his clothes off, came in, laid down next to me. His naked body was on mine, and I'll never forget not understanding what was happening. All of a sudden, he finished, didn't know what had happened. I was all sticky, but I looked over at him, he was smiling. And so in that moment, it went from anger earlier in the day to I had made him happy. And so from then on, anytime the happened, I thought finally something I'm doing that makes him happy. He's no longer angry. So in that moment, that's what was taught to me. He left the room, I fell to sleep, and every time thereafter that happened, sad to say, but I accepted it as being something normal because suddenly my dad was not angry with me anymore. We were a family that was not just ethnic. So I come from a beautiful line of Lebanese, Palestinian Americans. Now, the culture itself is beautiful. However, there's something about it. It's very patriarchal. And so we came from this culture of the patriarch said and did everything and you just followed suit. That mantle was then passed down to my brother. So I have an older brother who's 2 years older than me. In our mid-teens, that mantle was immediately passed down to him. And all of a sudden, my older brother had the same autonomy and authority as my dad did. And so that's when the abuse started with him as well. That was very physical. My brother was never to me, but it was complete control. I could not do anything without him. I could not go anywhere without him or my dad. They controlled my every move and my every word. Now, culturally, a lot of times that doesn't go to that point. So I don't want to just condemn the whole culture, but it was very natural. Then on top of that, there became this very fundamentalist Christian influence. So again, not to blanket the whole Christian religion with this type of, but when you go to the far corners of that religious sort of aspect, think the Duggars, right? So they did this whole show on that whole cult. That's the cult that we came out of. So it became very controlling, both from a cultural aspect as well as a religious aspect. We were homeschooled, home churched, and we had a home business. And so everything was in the home. And then we began to follow these cult leaders. So my dad, as an abuser himself, gravitated towards leadership models that were very cultish and very controlling. So whether that was in religion or business, we began to always affiliate with those types of cultures. We started with an air duct cleaning business. So at age 15, we started cleaning people's air ducts, and we became the largest air duct cleaning company in the state of Michigan. Then, after a couple of years of that, where we started to experience some financial freedom. So imagine you're growing up, you have no finances, right? My house was foreclosed on as a child. We were living in this house. It's this beautiful home. And then all of a sudden we're in this meeting. I can remember this super distinctly, talk about it in my book, where all of a sudden we're in this real estate office and the keys are literally being taken of my home from my dad and my mom and given to the landlord. And it was because my dad never really worked a day in his life. Throughout the years, couldn't rub two pennies together. Then air duct cleaning company happens. We start making a lot of money with the air duct cleaning business. And then after that, we create a mortgage company. I became a loan processor at age 17 and a half, and my brother became a loan officer. Now, the abuse is still happening, right? So throughout all the years, if you disagree with him, you're getting beat up. If you say something wrong in public, you're getting beat up when you come back home. We get dressed up on a Sunday, go to church, but then behind closed doors when we walk back in, you're getting beat up. Or it was this convergence of me thinking to myself, this is not normal. So I think it's important for people to understand that there is a victim mentality and then there's a mentality of a survivor. And so I saw myself always as a survivor. My mom sadly saw herself as a victim of the abuse. So she never went out and sought help. She never went out outside of the controlling environment. She never went out and said, there's something going on in my home. I need to protect my children. Whereas I have the survivor mentality of this is not okay behavior. We are not okay with this. And how do we get out? The continued on the road. My dad locked me out of hotel rooms. My brother locked me out of hotel rooms. I would be sitting crying and not able to sleep because I was locked out of our suite because I said something wrong during those travels. My life was threatened on more than one occasion that if I were to leave, I would be as good as dead, because they would find a way. And so the more I expanded the horizons, and that's what I think is super important for the public to understand, is that when you're being sheltered, everything sounds like it's never going to be fixed. So part of the important resources that we need to provide survivors in this world and in this country is showing them what's outside of that abusive realm. Continued till I was in my mid-20s was probably the last time that I consciously remember. And I've worked through a lot of therapy to get to that point. But in my mid-20s, it stopped. Did my younger siblings get? A lot of people ask. I do believe that was with my sisters as well. And again, to the point of a survivor versus a victim, my sisters used the abusive environment to their advantage. So we had lots of family businesses. They used it to excel in the family businesses. I was the loudmouth, right? So a lot of survivors versus victims speak their mind during the abuse. And so they get it worse. So I was told, you bring out the worst in him. No, I'm not bringing out the worst in him. That's who he is. And that's who I am. I'm going to speak my mind. And so throughout the years, again, physical, mental, emotional. So there's a couple of really great key stories that I will never forget. We were homeschooled, but there was a portion of our life where we went to public school, private school. There was 3 years that we did all of that. So I was coming home from school. There were 4 of us riding bikes, and this kid was being funny and doing like a wheelie, and I fell. Obviously, the kids and I are hobbling home. They help me back to the house, and my dad walks out of the house and starts screaming at me. Did you ruin your bike? Why do you have scratches all over you? Who are these children? Pushes me in front of the other 3 children, pushes me to the floor. The guy, I'll never forget him, picks me up. My dad shoves him to the side and is like, it's her fault. I know it's her fault. He brings me in the house and literally does not bandage my wound. I could not eat. I could not drink until I apologized for I don't even know what. And I think that is a key story for me because at the end of the day, I'm not trying to excuse the ever, but it's like a mental health issue. There's no rhyme or reason or understanding of why he would have gotten mad at me. Your daughter fell off of her bike. What did she do wrong? Another story is, so this one gets me really emotional. You feel abandoned when you feel like you're alone. I had done whatever I had done and whatever it was, I don't even remember what it was. I just remember being left alone. They literally all left the house. So at the time there were 4 of us because my youngest 2 siblings are a lot younger than me. And I was such a bad girl that they left me alone. I was probably 7 or 8. I was left alone for probably 5 or 6 hours. And in that time, I called my grandfather and he came over it was probably about 4 hours into it. And I remember when my family came back for the day, my grandfather and my dad got into almost a fist fight. My mom comes from a beautiful family, a very loving family. My dad had in his own family. His mom was very abusive to him, and his dad was a drug. And so he sort of continued the cycle that I've stopped. My mom comes from a very healthy family. So my grandfather didn't speak a lot of English, but because he came directly from Lebanon, he immigrated. But that day, I'll never forget him basically getting into a fist fight with my dad. And so that was another huge story. One of the stories that I really love telling is sort of my end all, the moment that I said enough was enough. And that was, and a part of that is my love story. And so I think it's very important to expand on sort of the love of my life and how that got me out. So at 9 years old was the first time I remember being, at 9 years old was the first time I also met the love of my life. So I met my childhood sweetheart at 9. We were at church camp, and he was different than anyone that I'd met in our culture or our community. And I said that day, this is the guy that I'm going to marry. So to the point of comes in all forms. While my parents and my dad and my brother knew that I was in love with this guy throughout my whole teen years, they wanted to control the narrative of who I was going to date and who I was going to marry. Could not date anyone, could not be seen outside with somebody from the opposite gender. In my early 20s, he stopped my dad and said, I want to date your daughter. And my dad said, that'll never happen. In my mid 20s, now we're traveling the country, doing all the seminars. So I look up the guy that I was in love with, and I called him and I said, hey, I'm independent now. We're traveling the country, would love to reconnect. Don't have to tell my dad. We reconnected. I really fell in love with him. We fell madly and deeply in love. We dated for about 3 months without telling anyone. And then we went to my dad in our big mansion in our piano room. We sat down in front of him and said, we're going to get married. And he said, fine, him or us. If you choose us, you have to get him out of your life because you're in love with him. We don't want him hanging around. If you choose him, well, then you'll never talk to your mom, your siblings, or I ever again. You're cut out from the estate, from any of the company paperwork. At the time, again, I'm 25. All I know is this life. So I stay with my family. I don't go with the love of my life, and I cut him off. So within 3 years, I had created a company. I had to sign it, all the paperwork, all the money actually over to my family, but I'd created my own company, got my own sort of income coming in because I knew once I left, it would be mine, and then started looking for apartments within about 3 years. Started dating someone actually from California. I was going to move to LA. That was going to be my ticket out. It was Christmas of 2010. The guy flew in. My dad didn't want him in our home. So I said, nope, we're hanging out. My dad grabbed my hair, threw me to the floor, dragged me across the floor, and basically threw me down the stairs. And I was like, that's it. So moved into an apartment, went on Match.com, and Match.com within 30 days matched me with the guy that I'd fallen in love with at 9. We reconnected. He reached out to me, and we started reconciling with my family. And then at Christmas time of 2011, he was going to propose to me. My dad tried to do the same thing over again after we'd reconciled. And this is what also people need to understand. A tiger doesn't change their stripes. This abusive situation will be there forever. There has to be some seriously drastic change. And that's what I had to come to the understanding of, is this abuser that was abusing me from the beginning will forever abuse me if I allow him in my life. And so we eloped on Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2012. We held a very big ceremony. And even at that ceremony in August, where we had 300 of our closest friends and family, my dad was horrible. We invited him because I wanted to have a clear conscience that my dad and mom and siblings were invited. But he was awful. You have to hit rock bottom, and you have to realize that as a survivor, you have your own life and your own path to carve. I'd love to be able to tell people that it goes away. I would always want to be this tender about my old self, about little JoJo. I will always want to nurture that little me inside. So I remember looking towards women it was women, females in any aspect of their life that was winning. Because sadly, I saw my mom as a loser. And I hate to say it, I don't mean to be crass, but she was not winning at life. She was not taking care of her children. So my mom was wildly successful in her career before she married my dad. She was the head of the consulate of Lebanon. So she met with presidents. She got her citizenship from President Reagan. Like, she was a wildly successful career woman until my dad began to control her. She's still legendary in the Detroit Council of Lebanon's office. Like, people will still remember her name because that's how amazing she was. So I took that part of her and I took all of the women that we met throughout those seasons. And I think that's something that's very important to my story because then I became that person. So I looked for that woman throughout my whole life. And then when I became an adult, I never wanted to stay there. I never thought this was normal. Like, the only thing I thought was halfway normal was, which is weird, was the rape, because it was the one time I made him happy. And that's the only reason I thought it was normal, because I wasn't educated on bodily anatomy. I think it's important to recognize that to be angry at something that is unjust. However, being angry and becoming your abuser is not okay. And so I had to recognize throughout the years where I picked up the abusive behaviors of my dad. So to the point that I'd be in a store or at a restaurant screaming at somebody because they did something wrong or they made a mistake. And so forgiving yourself and having grace for yourself that you took the influence from the abuser and you wore it on yourself could be fight or flight, or it just could be the fact that they influenced you because that was your attachment, right? So that's what all you knew. That was your environment. So I promised myself two things as a little girl. I would get out one day and I was going to help others get out one day, because I knew I wasn't the only one as I started expanding my horizons. So when I finally got out, I did everything that I could to tell my story. I started posting it on social media. I would tell anyone and everyone in business meetings, in social circles, that this is what happened to me. I was condemned by many people who are no longer in my life now, that we don't talk like that, because growing up, that's what you're told. We don't tell anyone outside of our situation what's happening. And so the community sided with them, and then part of the community sided with me. And so the more I began to tell my story, the more women started gravitating towards me. Hey, this happened to me. Hey, I'm currently going through this. So I would take a part of my paycheck through the years and help women, whether it was helping them with a car payment or groceries or kids' clothes or rent payment, whatever it was, my husband and I would help them. One of the main things that I really like to focus on is hope. Ultimately, we live in a world that likes to make us feel that we're in a very dark time. And I think the message I'd love to convey is there is hope and there is love out there. And if we all try to operate from that place of hope and love, we can make a better world for survivors, for ourselves, for future generations. No one's going to come save us. We're the people that are going to save each other.